Hello? Hello? Ah, there it goes. All right. So, welcome to United Astronomy Clubs of New Jersey. We have a lovely presentation for you tonight with Barry Malpas covering A Woman's Place is in the Dome. So, we are streaming this online live as well as our in-person presentation today. So while our public here gets set up as we are starting, I figure we'll go over a couple things. If you guys need to use the bathroom, we have the porta potty to my right, your left. We also have the sales desk for you to check out to my left and your right. All the proceeds from the sales desk do, in fact, go to keeping our lights on and us offering the free public programs to you guys. I want to do a big shout out to our YouTube subscribers. We're almost at 220 subscribers, so we're getting there. If you like us, please do check us out. Like I said, we do stream this live to YouTube. If you ever can't make it for whatever reason, or if the weather becomes unbearable, since we are doing this outside with COVID, we will continue to live stream, broadcast this live on the YouTube. You can check us out on our website, UACNJ.org, and that will allow you to check out all our member clubs, as well as you'll get to see a list of what our next presentations are throughout the year and any special events we may be able to offer. So, with that, let's see. We also have the our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter that you can also check out. That will also, we will post. So, Barry Malpas is currently vice president of the Coconino. I would definitely have pronounced that one wrong. Astronomical Society in Flagstaff, Arizona, and has taught astronomy at the local community college for the past 10 years. Previously, Mr. Malpas worked for the Bell Laboratories in New Jersey. He contributes monthly astronomy articles to the Williams Grand Canyon News and is also an astronomy historian, astrophotographer, and collector of antique astronomy books and meteorites. He is a past president of Amateur Astronomers Incorporated, Union County College in Cranford, New Jersey, and a co-founder and past director of the UACNJ Observatory in Jenny Jump State Park, Hope, New Jersey. And with that, here's Barry. Is your mic on? There, you should be loud.
Because it's a little bit light out here, you're going to have a little difficulty, unfortunately, seeing the projection on the screen. I hope you can see what's going on there. Anyway, my talk is A Woman's Place is in the Dome, A History of Women in Astronomy. And there have actually been quite a few women astronomers in history that a lot of people don't know about. But before I get to that, I'm going to give you a very quick history lesson as what was astronomy before the telescope was invented. It was basically survival, positional astronomy, and astrology. So why study the sky? The sky is an extension of the environment to most cultures. Agricultural, seasonal crops, when to reap. Positional astronomy used in navigation and direction. Astrology to predict the future. Better measurements and greater accuracy yields knowledge and power. Predictable is good. Seasonal events, lunar cycles, quarterly, monthly events, they're all predictable. Meteor showers occur monthly, annually, and they are predictable. But unpredictable is usually bad. Lunar eclipses were considered omens of doom. Solar eclipses, major omens of doom. Only predictable recently. Comets, again, portents of doom. Some now predictable. And meteorites landing on Earth, were they presents from the gods or religious signs? For instance, in 1492, a meteor fell in Eisenstein, France, which was declared a holy sign and changed to a church so it would not fly away. The Kaaba stone in Mecca is a meteorite. And in 1928, archaeologists at Eldon Pueblo, Arizona, discovered a 53-pound achondrite meteorite in one of the rooms. It was wrapped in the same manner of burial that a revered child of the Sanawa culture would be, indicating that the ancient Puebloan peoples also considered it a sacred object. So that's the quick background. You have to realize astronomy that we consider now is not the astronomy of the deep past. So, the earliest woman astronomers. Well, I can barely read this one myself. Enhedu Anna, 2,300 years ago. Thank you. She was the daughter of a ruler of Sumeria, and she was considered a priestess. She kept astronomical records of lunar phases for agricultural and astrological purposes, making her a positional astronomer and an astrologer. Agnaiki, also known as Athrita, 1900 years BCE, was the daughter and wife of King Sesostris III, king of Egypt, and she used celestial charts and studied constellations to predict the future. Therefore, she also was a positional astronomer and astrologer. Around 550 to 400 BCE, you had what was called the Pythagorean school. This was a secret religious philosophical society based on mathematics and astronomy led by Pythagoras of Samos. The school included both men and women. Women philosophers were so numerous that a book was written about them in the 3rd century BCE by Philochorus of Athens. A particular woman who lived around 500 BCE was Theano. She was the wife of Pythagoras. She was a documented mathematician and astronomer, and after Pythagoras' murder, she continued to spread the Pythagorean ideas. Oxella was another woman astronomer who lived about 100 years later. Around 387 BCE to the 6th century of the Common Era, you had the Academy of Plato in Athens, Greece. He believed in the education for women, including mathematics and astronomy, and many women were associated with his school and studied astronomy. However, there are no specific individuals on record noted as astronomers. We just know generally that they studied astronomy. Aglaonike of Thessaly, shown in the picture seated, was around 200 BCE. She was the daughter of Hegetor, a reputed sorceress and astrologer. So according to Plutarch, she had the ability to make the moon disappear. Does that sound familiar? So she was apparently acquainted with the 18-year lunar solar Saros cycle, which allowed her to predict lunar eclipses, which gave her quite a bit of power, by the way. A number of female astrologers regarded as sorcerers, known as the witches of Thessaly, were also associated with her. Then we come into more recent times. The Museum of Alexandria in Egypt was a great university of learning, flourished between 300s BCE to the 400s in the Common Era. Contained hundreds of thousands of scrolls, and around 400 CE, you had a woman by the name of Hypatia. You may have heard of her name before. She was the daughter of Theon, who was the head of the Alexandrian Museum/University. She was a Neoplatonist and studied the ideas of Plato and Plotinus, who were forerunners of the Renaissance. She headed the Alexandrian Museum from 405 to 415 CE after her father died. And she is a documented mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher. Her known accomplishments include, she is credited with designing astronomical instruments like the astrolabe, shown in this photograph on the right of the screen. She wrote documentaries on the 13-volume Arithmetica of Diophantus, wrote commentary on the conics of Apollonius, which is geometry, edited and wrote commentary on the existing versions of Ptolemy's Almagest, the Greek mathematical astronomical geocentric model of the universe. And she edited her father's commentary on Euclid's Elements, geometry and number theory. She authored the astronomical canon. Unfortunately, her works are known only through the writings of others, such as Synesius of Cyrene and Socrates Scholasticus, who were two of her pupils. In 412 CE, Cyril became the new Christian patriarch of Alexandria. In 415, a Christian mob under the leadership of Peter the Reader, a follower of Cyril, attacked Hypatia in the streets because of her Neoplatonistic pagan views. She was taken to a church, stripped, murdered, and savagely butchered, and her remains cast into the fires. The Christian fanatical mobs also destroyed much of the museum at Alexandria. Hypatia's works and thousands of others were all lost. Cyril was later canonized. Historians often use Hypatia's death as ushering in the Dark Ages, which ranged from around 450 to 1000 CE. Not a lot of science advanced in this period. It was followed by the Middle Ages, around 1000 to 1440. Some technology progressed, but not much science accomplished in Europe. Advances primarily were in Islamic and Byzantine countries. Then came the Renaissance. And with the Renaissance came several women who worked in astronomy. Sophia Brahe was the sister to Danish astronomer, astrologer Tycho Brahe. Regularly assisted her brother with many of his observations. She helped him with observations on the November 1572 supernova, which led to the discovery of the supernova. She observed and recorded the lunar eclipse of December of 1573. She also helped her brother with producing horoscopes for clients. When Tycho died, the data they gathered was passed to Tycho's pupil, Johannes Kepler, rather than to Sophia. The work Sophia Brahe assisted her brother with helped lay the groundwork for both Kepler and Isaac Newton's work. Then you have Virginia Gamba, who was the illegitimate daughter of Galileo Galilei. She was placed in a convent at the age of 13, and in 1616 she took the name of Sister Maria Celeste. Interesting choice, the fact that her father was doing astronomical work. She corresponded with her father concerning many astronomical topics, in which there are 124 letters over 11 years in which she discusses a lot of his work, astronomical work in particular. She prepared manuscripts for several of her father's books, and Galileo described her as a woman of exquisite mind, singular goodness, and most tenderly attached to me. You have in Germany or Poland, depending upon which year you want to choose, Maria Kunitz. She was a Polish mathematician, received an education from her father and tutors, and she spoke 7 languages. She married Dr. Elias von Leeuwen in 1630, who shared her interest in astronomy. She calculated planetary orbits and recalculated Kepler's Rudolphine tables of stellar positions with corrections and published them as Urana Propitia in 1650. And she also corresponded with astronomer Johann Hevelius, which I will note in a few minutes. Madame Marguerite de la Sablière was a French scientific lady observer. She studied math and astronomy on her own. She tried to keep her studies private because such endeavors were considered unladylike. Poet Nicolas Beaulieu d'Esperaux mocked her in a satire on women, describing her as spending nights astrolabe in hand, observing the planet Jupiter, an occupation that weakened her eyesight and ruined her complexion. Author Charles Perrault wrote an apology on women, defending her. Elizabeth Koopman Hevelius was the second wife of Johann Hevelius, and they had their own observatory in Danzig, Poland. They made stellar and lunar observations together. In a treatise on his instrumentation, her husband spoke highly of her observational skills. She was very talented with a sextant and other astronomical equipment, and this drawing of her is from one of the publications by Hevelius, which includes his wife doing observations. After his death, she completed his last 3 works on stellar positions and instrumentation between 1687 and 1690. Marguerite Kirsch, or Maria Marguerite Kirsch, she was educated by her father and uncle. She studied astronomy under Christoph Arnold as his assistant, met and married Gottfried Kirsch in 1692. They had 4 children, 1 boy and 3 girls, all of whom became astronomers. Together they produced calendars, almanacs, and ephemerides for many years until in 1700 he became the astronomer royal at the Berlin Observatory. Maria became his assistant. On April in April 1702, Maria observed a new comet while scanning the sky through the observatory telescope. She's the first woman to independently discover one. When Gottfried fell ill, Maria continued to run the Berlin Observatory, but after he died in 1710, she was not allowed to continue her work because she was a woman. By 1716, however, her son Christfried became observatory director, and she continued along with her daughter Christine and her two other daughters, assisting him at the observatory. Continuing on, we have Maria Emmert Müller, who was the daughter of an engraver who had his own observatory in Nuremberg. She made detailed lunar, planetary, and comet astronomical illustrations and 350 telescopic lunar feature drawings between 1693 and 1698. She married Johann Müller, professor of mathematics, in 1706. He was also supportive to her work. A year after their marriage, Maria died in childbirth. Many of her drawings were willed to a Jesuit college, but the library was destroyed in a fire about a century later. So most of her work is gone. Now, we have, obviously not a woman, if you can see the image on the screen here, Bernard Le Bouvier de Fontenelle. Obviously not a woman, as I said. But he wrote a book called Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds. Originally published in 1686 in a conversational format between a man and a woman. Mon Dieu! Which, if you don't speak French, that means my God. Female readers were addressed specifically and intelligently. The science of astronomy was written to be understood by those without a scientific education. It was highly popular and translated into over a dozen languages for over 150 years, and printed in a small, diminutive format, allowing for easy concealment in the pocket of a woman's dress. The publication resulted in objections by the Catholic Church, who banned it. And one of the things not mentioned on my bio is I collect antique astronomy books, and I actually have 2 copies of this book. Madame Nicole René Lapute married Jean Lapute, a royal clockmaker. She was self-taught in mathematics and astronomy. And astronomer Joseph Lalande stated she was the most distinguished French woman astronomer. She was asked by Lalande and Clairaut to help compute the time of the return of Halley's comet. Edmund Halley had observed data from 3 previous comets, and he figured out that all 3 were the same comet, but up until then they had no actual proof. And she used Newton's equations to calculate the timing of when Halley would return. Her calculations included the gravitational interactions with the planets Jupiter and Saturn. Her predictions were moderately off only because she did not know about the existence of Uranus and Neptune, which had not yet been discovered. This is a painting here showing in 1759 the return of Halley's comet. She calculated the circumstances of the 1764 solar eclipse timings and percentages with quarter hourly progress for all of Europe. And she also published numerous almanacs and addendums to other astronomers' work. Still, the idea of women capable of scientific thought, Nicholas Malebranche made the statement, propounded the idea that women were intellectually inferior to men because of the great sensibility of the nerve fibers in their brains. And when asked in 1708 by a reader whether women were as capable as men, the British Apollo newspaper replied that women are cast in too soft a mold, are made of too fine, too delicate composure to endure the severity of study, the drudgery of contemplation, the fatigue of profound speculation. Now, those who have read something in astronomy books have probably heard the name Caroline Herschel. And by the way, this portrait is the only portrait of her which was done by my brother. Became the most eminent female astronomer during the late 1700s and early 1800s. She was brought to England from Hanover, Germany by her brother William as his housekeeper. Her early education had been supported by their father, but not her mother, who preferred her to help with the family duties. She studied mathematics and astronomy with her brother William, becoming his observing assistant, taking detailed notes. And this is the only true image from the time period that we have of Caroline Herschel when she was young, this silhouette. And that's what that portrait was based on the previous slide. But she did extensive calculations for her brother's work and edited his papers, prepared his catalogs for publication. She helped build his telescopes, in which the mirrors were made of speculum metal. They did not use glass with overcoat then. And her brother William referred to her as a born mirror grinder. Together they produced the best and the largest telescopes of the period, 48-inch mirror. That's 4 feet across. The telescopes that you see in these buildings here are at most 16 inches across. She's the co-discoverer of a new planet, Georgium Sidus, in 1781, because she was there when writing down all the information when her brother looked through the telescope to find the planet Uranus. She also worked independently when her brother was away. She discovered 3 nebulae on her own. She discovered 8 comets on her own. First internationally recognized female astronomer, and she won a gold medal from the English Astronomical Society, as well as a gold medal from the King of Prussia. She was an honorary Royal Astronomical Society member. Honorary only because women were not allowed to be members, full members in the British Astronomical Society. She was elected a member of the Royal Irish Academy, first professional woman astronomer paid a stipend of $50 per annum by King George III as her brother's assistant. You may remember King George III from, he's the guy we fought in 1776. Author Flamsteed's observations on the fixed stars, giving reference to every star in the British catalogue, and she wrote a catalogue in zones of all star clusters observed by Sir William Herschel. And this is just a very short list, etc., etc., etc. Mary Fairfax Somerville She was the daughter of a vice admiral in the British Navy. At 14, became interested in algebra and learned it by listening to her brother when he was being tutored. Had a relentless thirst for scientific knowledge. Her first marriage to Samuel Grieg was not supported, but he died early, luckily for her. And in her second husband, William Somerville, was very supportive. She hobnobbed in the circles of John Herschel, young Babbage, Biot-Simon, Laplace, and others. Very, very strong scientific people in that time period. She wrote papers on physical aspects of the sun's light and its spectrum. She claims were made there were only about 30 men in France and England capable of understanding Laplace's Mécanique Céleste, which was all written in calculus. She translated it into English as The Mechanism of the Heavens, with explanations and added illustrations. She published 3 other treatises on astronomy and the physical sciences. But even she got comments. I wonder you let Mary waste her time in reading. She never sews more than if she were a man. She should give up her foolish manner of life and make a responsible and useful wife. And this came from a female Somerville family member. Now we come across the ocean to the United States. Maria Mitchell. She was educated at local academies in Massachusetts, learned most of her astronomy from her father, an amateur observer in Nantucket. And she was the first to discover the comet of October 1847 using a telescope. Now, but she was not the only observer or person who discovered it independently. There were 2 men, but also Mary Ann Crocker Rumford in Germany, who discovered it independently. Maria, being the first, received a gold medal from the King of Denmark. And she became a popular speaker in the United States and in Europe, became the American Caroline Herschel, but no work was available to her other than speaking until in 1862 she was offered the teaching position by Matthew Vassar at his new women's college. Published many scientific papers. She first woman member of the American Academy of Science, Arts and Sciences, American Association for the Advancement of Science, lived with her father at the observatory built by her, for her by Vassar, and founded the Association for the Advancement of Women in 1873. She fought for equal pay, male and female faculty, and she taught many of the future women who would become astronomers. Again, a general commentary. There can be no real question that the female mind stands considerably below the male. The ready firmness of decision, which belongs by nature to the truly masculine mind, is very rarely to be met in the feminine. Notice he's a well-known biologist and psychologist. Agnes Mary Clerk. Her father was her mentor, but she was generally self-taught. She wrote articles in the application of the spectroscope in astronomy. She was a member of the Royal Astronomical Society, now that they allowed women to join. She wrote popular history of astronomy during the 19th century, which is considered, and still is considered, a standard work. Some other works are The System of the Stars, Problems in Astrophysics. She consistently published in the Edinburgh Review, Observatory Magazine, Encyclopedia Britannica, and other resources. And still, I have seen occasionally references to her work in today's magazines. Margaret Murray Huggins, who has an Einstein hairdo, was a pioneer in the field of astrospectroscopy. She constructed her own spectroscope, which impressed her teacher, William Huggins. And then they got married. It's interesting what draws people together. They co-published the first atlas of stellar spectroscopy. They published many papers with her husband and on her own, and felt men would accept women as equals if they did the work. Sonia Kovalevsky was not an astronomer. She was born Sofia Krutovskaya in Moscow, and at 18 she married paleontologist Vladimir Kovalevsky, studied mathematics in Berlin and received her doctorate in 1874, offered chair of mathematics at Stockholm University, wrote a number of mathematical treatises which included the structure of the rings of Saturn, and she was first to mathematically prove that they were not solid but had to be made of particles, and she did that mathematically. Ah, yes, Max Planck, very well-known physicist, felt the way a lot of the other male scientists did at the time. If a woman has a special gift, which does not happen often, I do not think it right to refuse her the chance and means of studying, but such a case must always be regarded as an exception. Dorothea Klumpke Roberts was born in San Francisco, California, educated in Germany, Switzerland, and France, and she was multilingual. Received her PhD in 1893 from the University of Paris. Worked at Paris Observatory measuring nebula and asteroids. Became director of the Paris Bureau of Measurements, over 50 male applicants. She married astronomer Dr. Isaac Roberts in 1901, but she was awarded the French Cross of the Legion of Honor, and she was a member of the British and French Astronomical Associations, American Association for the Advancement of Science. Women's colleges in the United States, let's try that again, were primarily found early to the mid-19th century. Women were not admitted to most colleges because they were for men only. There was a need for advanced education for women, but most were liberal arts schools. There were a few co-educational colleges, such as Oberlin, Lawrence, Antioch, and Bates. But then you had a number of women's colleges being created: Holyoke, Vassar, Wellesley, Smith, Radcliffe, Bryn Mawr, and Barnard. Degrees they could get as undergraduate, but not graduate. The purpose of having women educated at this level was to round out their otherwise mundane lives. So they were not expected to get jobs. Sarah Frances Whiting taught at Wellesley and developed one of the most advanced undergraduate physics labs in the country, second only to the lab at MIT. She outfitted the new Witten Observatory with a 12-inch Fitz-Clark refracting telescope fitted with spectroscope and photometer. Her greatest legacy to science is that of being an inspiring educator, her most famous student being Annie J. Cannon, where the arrow is pointing to Annie in the photograph. Whiting is sitting down in the front. She also published many articles and several astronomy and physics texts. Now, at Harvard College Observatory, you had a fellow by the name of Edward Charles Pickering. He was the new director of the Harvard College Observatory in 1881. He was interested in the new science of spectroscopy. Stellar spectra had been ignored and were considered a curiosity but unimportant by most astronomers of the time. Many of his male assistants were inefficient. They considered it drudgery work. Frustrated, he said, "My Scottish maid could do better." Enter his housekeeper, Wilhelmina Fleming, who did such excellent work. He put her in charge of hiring women astronomers, computers from the women's colleges, from majoring in astronomy, mathematics, and physics. And this is a picture of the group of them. Pickering off to the left, and two Fleming in the middle. And also in the picture are two well-known women astronomers, Leavitt and Cannon, who I will mention in a few minutes. Anyway, Wilhelmina Fleming came from Dundee, Scotland at the age of 24. She was separated from her husband. She was a public school graduate, part-time teacher, began cataloging stellar spectra at the request of Pickering, oversaw the Henry Draper catalog of stellar spectra. Funding was from Draper's widow, by the way, and cataloged spectra of more than 10,000 stars by 1890. She discovered 59 nebulae, 310 variable stars, and 10 novae. She spent 30 years at Harvard Observatory, where stellar spectroscopy became women's work. There were so many women working at Harvard College Observatory, they were often referred to as Pickering's harem. Antonia Maury was a graduate of Vassar, niece to astronomer Henry Draper, of which the Draper catalog was named. She noticed that spectra could be put in continuous series and created the first spectral classification system, which was alphabetical. She published the first Harvard observatory catalog. But then came Annie Jump Cannon, who graduated from Wellesley. She was an assistant at the observatory from 1896, discovered numerous variable stars and several novae, published the first volume of 1600 spectra of the brighter stars in 1901. She rearranged the spectral classification of Maury with a new classification which basically had the letters O, B, A, F, G, K, M, which defined the broad characteristics of the stars. Then each class was divided into 10 subclasses, 0 through 9. Any amateur astronomer knows that grouping of letters, because it is the basic classification used today. Final catalog, 9 volumes. Between 1911 to 1915, there were 225,300 stars, which she cataloged. Continued to catalog almost as many of the fainter stars for 25 years. So basically, altogether, she singly cataloged almost 500,000 stars of spectra. She was the first woman to receive an honorary doctorate in science from Oxford University, and she created the Annie J. Cannon Prize for women whose contributions to astronomy are most distinguished. The lunar crater Cannon is named for her. Henrietta Swan Leavitt, who was in one of the earlier photographs with Pickering, was from Radcliffe, became an assistant at Harvard in 1893, became head of the photometric photometry department, and photographically determined stellar brightnesses of variable stars. She specifically observed things called Cepheid variable stars, and in 1908 she discovered that their periods were directly proportional to their luminosity or their magnitudes. She discovered what is called the period luminosity relationship, and the unique shape of the curve of the Cepheid variable allows astronomers to recognize them and determine distances to very distant stars in the Milky Way. But Cepheid variables are also in other galaxies, the small and large Magellanic Clouds in the southern hemisphere. She also observed them, and she realized she could determine their distances as well. The Andromeda Galaxy and others have been determined in this way. Prior to this, they thought these galaxies like Andromeda or the small and large Magellanic Clouds were just nebula, and they didn't realize that they were actually island universes of their own. The method greatly increased the measured size of the known universe. All other astronomical distance measurements are based on this relationship. Mary Proctor, daughter of British and American astronomer Richard Proctor, educated in astronomy by her father and helped him edit and publish many of his popular works. She authored about 24 astronomy books of her own, contributed articles to many newspapers and journals, and was a popular public speaker. Most of her works were directed to the general public and young people, as they were easy to read, yet informative, accurate, and well illustrated. One of her books was adopted by the New York City Board of Education. She also taught astronomy in several private academies while attending Columbia University. The lunar crater Proctor is named for her. Rose Ann O'Halloran. And by the way, this portrait is also done by my brother. Born in Ireland, immigrated to New York City in 1874, and she eventually ended up in San Francisco. First female member of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. She became a vice president, an ASP board and member, as well as library committee member. She owned her own 4-inch Breshear refractor telescope and observed and studied solar eclipses, sunspots, and variable stars, contributing data and articles to journals and magazines. Went on a one-woman solar eclipse expedition to Mexico in 1900 and took data and drawings. Observed right through the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and kept her telescope upright. Taught astronomy to young women at several girls' schools in San Francisco, contributed astronomy articles regularly to several of the San Francisco area newspapers, and she was a popular speaker on astronomy around San Francisco. Was friends with Edward Holden of Lick Observatory and ASP, and visited Lowell Observatory, Flagstaff, where I live these days, in 1902. Women's inequalities. The 1880s saw the rise of large research budgets, which was helpful to women. Maury, Cannon, Leavitt, etc. were able to work in research, but they weren't advanced very far. By 1910, women could get degrees from almost all U.S. and German universities, as well as many British and French institutions. Female skills did not threaten male positions. They did women's work, usually as computers. In other words, they did the calculations and making photographic and spectroscopic plate measurements. Women's jobs left men to study the more prestigious work. Demand for teachers increased in women's colleges, but the colleges hired more male faculty to bolster their images. Men could marry, women could not. If so, they were required to resign. Early women published little, teaching loads or college planning took most of their time. Women made careers of a single job at 1/2 to 1/3 the pay. Then we have Cecilia Payne Kabashkin, or when she was not married, Cecilia Payne. She went to school in Wendover, England. At 12, she was fluent in 3 languages. She went to Cambridge University studying botany, chemistry, physics, and mathematics. She attended a lecture by Sir Arthur Eddington on Einstein's general theory of relativity. Returning to her room, she transcribed the presentation verbatim. Unfortunately, there was no future in England other than teaching, so she accepted Harlow Shapley, the new head of Harvard College Observatory, to come and do research. And he persuaded her to do a PhD at Harvard Observatory. What she studied was spectra, with the real catching title of Stellar Atmospheres, a Contribution to the Observational Study of High Temperatures in the Reversing Layers of Stars, which sounds like a lot of gobbledygook possibly to uneducated people, but her paper on stellar atmospheres was the first written on the subject. She proved that the sun was composed mostly of hydrogen and helium, though Henry Norris Russell at Princeton took the credit. She compared spectral line intensities versus spectral class, then computed intensities versus temperature. This defined the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram on which all of cosmology is based. She is the first person to receive a PhD for work at Harvard Observatory. And the well-known astronomer Otto Struve stated, "It is the most brilliant PhD thesis ever written in astronomy." Other women researchers, you have Margaret Mile, who researched novae, variable stars, and she became director of the American Association of Variable Star Observers. You have Dorrit Hoffleit, who lived to be 100, by the way, and she's discovered more than 1,000 variable stars. She's observed stellar spectra at Yale, discovered the variability of the first quasar. Dr. Jocelyn Bell, an Irish-English radio astronomer graduate student researching under Dr. Anthony Hewish in 1967. She was tracking the sky. She observed fast pulsing radio signals once every 1.3 seconds, like pop, 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 pop. The source was originally designated LGM for little green men. But eventually they were identified as pulsars, very fast-spinning neutron stars, considered one of the greatest astronomical discoveries of the 20th century. Hewish was awarded the Nobel Prize. In the Smithsonian in 1976, the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum presented its first planetarium show, a history of 200 years of American astronomy. Only male astronomers were included. Vera Rubin got her BA at Vassar College, attempted to enroll in Princeton, but women were not admitted at the time. She got an MA at Cornell University. A PhD at Georgetown University, showed that galaxies were clumped together and not randomly distributed. The first woman allowed to use the instruments at Palomar Observatory, and pioneered work on the rotation rates of galaxies. And what she showed with galaxies is they are rotating too fast, because otherwise they would fly apart. The velocities remain high, far beyond the optical disk. This implies that cumulative mass rise linearly with radius. The galaxies must contain at least 10 times as much dark mass as can be accounted for by the visible stars. In other words, she found what we're now calling dark matter. Dr. Rubin has won many awards for her research, including an honorary doctorate from Princeton University. Margaret Geller got her BA from UC Berkeley, PhD from Princeton, which now allowed women in. And by the way, my wife is a graduate of Princeton as well. Studies cosmology and extragalactic astronomy. And Geller is co-discoverer of hypervelocity stars near the galactic center of the Milky Way. Studies large-scale structures of the universe. These large scales shown here are clusters of galaxies in the universe. They're the largest structures ever seen. Her map based on redshift survey data clearly showed large-scale three-dimensional structures in the universe, clumps of clusters. So, how are women currently doing in astronomy? Astronomy bachelor's degrees, women are about 1/3. PhDs, about 40%. However, women faculty in astronomy departments stand at about 15 to 20%. Women are currently about 20 to 30% of astronomers. Some have made it to the top, such as the ladies listed below. Women astronomers in Flagstaff. Since I have given this talk in Flagstaff, I chose my local area, Lowell Observatory. Carolyn Schumacher discovered 32 comets on her own. You'll notice there's another lady sitting to the right of her. That's Dr. Mary Lou West from Montclair University. Deidre Hunter, irregular galaxies. Lisa Prado, binary star systems. Evgenia Shkolnik, extrasolar planets. And there are a number of women research assistants at Lowell. Northern Arizona University, Dr. Kathy Eastwood, emeritus, massive star formation. Nadine Barlow, Mars impact cratering. Christina Thomas, near-Earth asteroids. And Lisa Chien, star formation and merging galaxies. Women on the moon and Venus. In other words, there are features on the moon named after a lot of women astronomers, a lot of women astronomers also on this list who I have not even mentioned tonight, as well as on Venus. You'll recognize a couple of the names, but most you will not. They've all done research in astronomy. And in 1990, the International Astronomical Union voted to name all features on Venus after women. So, here are some comets: Herschel, Mitchell, Schumacher. Asteroids named after women. So what are and have women been to astronomy? They have been researchers, theoreticians, discoverers, mathematicians, computers, observers, educators, authors, and popularizers. Thank you for coming.
All right. Thank you very much.
And if you have any questions.
Yep, we will be doing a question and answer session now. I do ask that when you have any questions, you're going to raise your hand, and I'm going to walk over with the microphone so that our online audience who is watching can also hear the question as well as the answer. I did put out a call for any questions on our online audience, and while I'm waiting for perhaps a couple to come in, I'm going to go over a couple things. Like I said at the beginning, if you do need to use the restroom, it is to my right or your left in the porta potty. We do have a sales desk. I noticed there were a couple Girl Scouts here. We do have patches for UACNJ available, as well as a couple other fun items. We do have one, I want to say we have one observatory open. I can't say that we're going to be observing much because it looks very overcast and the moon looks like an overgrown dust bunny. That being said, usually we do have a slideshow up with showing in this case pictures from previous observing talk sessions. Again, with COVID and the related sanitation required between people viewing an eyepiece, we didn't want to destroy the eyepieces, so we now have a camera that we put where the eyepiece would go, and that camera transmits to a computer and then to a projector screen so that you would be able to see what you would see through the scope, just without that unfortunately using the eyepiece. So with that, I want to thank Mr. Malpas. Was there any questions from our live audience here? And you might have to raise your hand high because it is now dark, and sometimes my eyes are not that great. Bueller? Anyone out? All right.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Mr. Malpas, I have a friend who was in contact with astrophysicist Sally Balyunis, who I didn't hear mention. She got into trouble some 10 years ago with the global warming enthusiasts because she showed that other stars have cycles like the sun that can warm their planets. Have you any information on Professor Balyunis?
No, I do not. Most of my research actually covers women working up to around 1950. I included some of the more modern ones because they just stand out like like the sun itself. They've added so much to the science of astronomy, but most of my work is in historical astronomy. So, and there are quite a few women astronomers out there now doing fantastic work all over the world. So, if I were to include a lot of them in my talk, you would be here till about maybe next year. Mm-hmm.
All right. There was one online question so far. It was mentioned at the beginning of the talk that Mr. Malpas was a co-founder of UACNJ. Have there been many changes since then, and do you have any thoughts on those changes?
Okay. Well, the UACNJ started as an idea of getting the different astronomy clubs together so we wouldn't compete with each other, and hopefully we would. I was president of the Amateur Astronomers Incorporated in Cranford at the time, and so that we wouldn't compete on events. And then we decided when we got together, maybe it would be good to have a state area organization and actually look for a dark sky site, because you have to admit, New Jersey in general is not very dark in most of the places. At Jenny Jump, it's one of the few areas that is reasonably dark where you can actually still see on a clear, dark evening the Milky Way. And so that's kind of how it started. And we looked around and we lucked out by finding this location, which was actually a private home behind me here. And what we did was we made negotiations with the park to put on public programs for them April through October. And then we were allowed to build different club observatories, which many of them are over there. The first observatory was actually over in the rear of the building. It's called the Greenwood Observatory, not because the leaves are green, but one of the heaviest workers was Don Greenwood, who now also lives in Arizona, but in the Tucson area, and I happened to visit him about 2 weeks ago. But we named it after him because he had put in so much work. The other observatories have been named after different people, including myself, actually. You'll notice a Barry D. Malpas Observatory over there, which is the observatory named from the Amateur Astronomers Incorporated's observatory. But I know there are 2 or possibly 3 others named for individuals who put a lot of work into this facility. Has it changed a lot? Yes, it's changed quite a bit. I was its director for basically 13 years. I gave up my position running this a year before I knew I was going to move to Arizona. And the reason I did that was because I didn't want to just leave everybody flat. So I basically just stuck around here and let people pick my brains, so that, where can you find this? What's that doing here? What is this piece of equipment? All things like that I knew, but had never been written down in many cases. So, I just noticed tonight some equipment that's not totally documented in there yet, but I still have a few things at home, so I could send them in.
Soon.
But
soon everything will be documented.
Yeah, well, let's hope.
It's probably documented, it's just not clearly labeled yet.
Yeah, well, that could be. But, but so much has been added. Gil Jaffer, who basically took over my position for quite a few years, has added all the computer stuff in this facility that's upstairs, and I believe even some of the observatories are computer run now, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
I do know there are computerized, go-to mounts.
Yeah.
And you guys have to forgive me for perhaps not being the most technically inclined of the people here. And I may occasionally call something the wrong thing. But we do have several telescopes that are on mounts where they have been aligned, and since they are aligned properly, they have a remote where it's a computer assist where you could basically tell it to go to M13, which is an object in the sky in the Messier count.
Yeah, it's globular cluster.
Okay, I'm like, I know which one that is, but I can't think of it at the moment. But it would then rotate itself to be able to view that in the sky. So there are a number of that. Eventually, we do have planned to add computer screens. That way, when one person's looking through the eyepiece, possibly another person can see what is available in the scope currently for electronically assisted astronomy. All right, so it doesn't look like there's any questions online. Are there any more questions from our audience? Oh, yay, someone actually used to flag me down.
Hi, you listed all the barriers to women in astronomy over the centuries. What are the barriers today?
To women, I assume you mean? Well, again, you still have in top positions, you have a lot of men who, unfortunately, we have a thing called testosterone. and there's a certain percentage of men who just don't want to give up the power. And to me, it's ridiculous, because it should be whoever can do the best job, and who is obviously, so many of these women have been way superior to a lot of the men. For instance, Cecilia Payne Kapashkin, her married name Kapashkin, he was a Russian astronomer. And he did good work, but nothing as good as Cecilia Payne did, his wife. But today, it's like every other job. There's that, I guess they call it that glass ceiling. You have it in science as well. Yeah.
Unfortunately, and speaking from experience, every field and every career path a woman can go into, there will always be men saying you cannot do this, so you're too delicate.
Yeah.
My sincere suggestion is go for it anyway, prove them wrong, and destroy them. We got one more question?
Yeah, just one quick comment. We do have the fortune to have here first woman to work at UACNJ in 1994, Jan Bunis.
There you go.
All right. Are there any more questions? All right.
Okay.
So that's going to wrap up tonight's talk. I want to thank everyone for coming out. Our live audience, as you do decide to leave tonight, please use your headlights. It hurts to get run over in the car in the dark. We'd like to avoid that.
That is a problem, yes.
Do check, like I said, do check us out on our website, uacnj.org. We are also available on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. As you notice, someone actually pointed out to me, messaged me earlier, that perhaps I should point out, for anyone who wanted to see who is here and couldn't exactly see the screen because it is daylight and we're using a projector which is dependent on it being dark, if you wanted to see any of the information, you can go onto our YouTube and view our presentations, and you would be able to clearly see the slideshow that was presented tonight. So that'll help you out. Also, another note, as it gets warmer and the weather gets better, not that it was bad tonight, it was quite warm, but also quite buggy. When you come here to the site, I do suggest bringing your own bug spray because I have been eaten alive. I have a mosquito on my head. So do bring your bug spray. Do remember that any trash is carried. If you bring it here, you also take it with you. Unfortunately, we had a bit of cleanup last time. So with that, have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. I would just like to make... I live in Flagstaff, Arizona now. And there's an event that happens every September in Flagstaff called the Festival of Science. It's a 10-day event. And it includes astronomy, geology, you name whatever the ology is, biology, all of them. And it includes Lowell Observatory and the Naval Observatory, as well as NAU, Northern Arizona University, and a whole bunch of other scientific facilities that are in Flagstaff. And all of this is open to the public that entire week for free. So if you look up Flagstaff Festival of Science, if you happen to be driving out there in September, join us. It's a great event. It really is a great event. Plus you get to see the Grand Canyon, that big hole in the ground. So thank you for coming.